Welcome, good thinkers. Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Today, please ignore the background mess. We are deep in a virtual workshop season here at Applied Curiosity Lab. So I have to have the cameras set exactly so that I don't have to rearrange everything for maximum engagement for our Applied Curiosity and Critical Thinking workshop. So ignore the background. It is what it is. We're all good friends. You can see it. But welcome here. Let me know who you are and where you're from. And let's get started on giving ourselves just a little bit of time, stealing a little bit of time away from all the time that we spend on what to think so we can improve how to think. And today's show is going to be directly related to that because we are going to be borrowing from one of my favorite fantasy dinner guests, Richard Feynman, and we're going to be borrowing his technique, simple, so profound, his technique for learning about anything. And so grab your knowledge notebook, because I'm going to recommend you have one. Grab your knowledge notebook and be ready to fill it out. Let me say hi to some people here. Jennifer Felberg. Jennifer Felberg is in the house. Let me know where you are from. Mo. Hey, Mo from DC. Fantastic. Welcome, Mo. Favorite person, Jennifer Felberg. Favorite person, Mo. And Barry Kibrick. Barry from LA. Fantastic. Welcome here. Barry has an incredible podcast and show you should definitely check out, as does Mo Barrett. So we've got some real fabulous people here in the house. Let me know who you are and where you're from. We're going to get started. Have you ever took a test? Have you ever taken a test rather, and you just crushed it. You scored top score. And 2 weeks later, if you were asked, you could barely even describe anything about the subject. I can definitely attest to this fact. So as you're letting us know who you are and where you're from, let me know, what is a subject you think about where you thought, wow, I aced that test? And if you had to describe or even explain the topic today, you couldn't even get started. What is that topic? I will tell you mine if you tell me yours. Welcome, Stephen. Okay, say hi to some people. I've got some family members in the house. Greetings from the home of the first all-vegan strip club in the United States. Yeah, that's a good one. Vegan strip club. Portland, Oregon. That is true. And Barry says, love Feynman. You're going to love, yeah, me too. He's kind of one of my fantasy dinner guests. And let me know the topics that you are a topic, and I'll confess mine. So my topic would probably be Oriental philosophy or Asian philosophy. I took a lot of it in college, and I just crushed it. And if I had to explain, I could name the names, Taoism, I could Confucius, I could name the names of things, but I probably, well, for sure, could not explain it in a way that meant that I really knew it. And that is a hint at something that Feynman describes as the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. So what is the topic that you would have to admit that you once crushed a test? You knew everything there was to know to take a test, like you had memorized the facts. But if you had to share it today, you'd be busted. Any topic. Oh, Stephen says, still the only vegan strip club in the US. Okay, you might know a little too much about this topic. All right, so let's get started on what topic. Let us know, let me know, share with other good thinkers. What is a topic that you think, oh, come on, share it. All right. I can't even remember what I read yesterday, Jennifer says. Yeah, but that's different because maybe you never even knew it enough to pass a test. But I have the same problem. I have to admit, I have the same problem. And part of it is, we have more information, being bombarded with more information than ever before. And we think that our access to information is what informs our opinions, but our opinions are usually formed on shaky ground, on shaky content. And this speaks to how you can create a foundation of reliable knowledge that you can base your opinions on, if that's what you want. Fiona, welcome, Fiona. Fiona says calculus. Okay, clearly Fiona's not the only one, because Barry says math. And not too long ago, I had to take a math, it's been a long time, but relative to when I was in school taking tests, I had to take a math test, and I had to get a book to kind of even remind myself of some of the basic algebra. It was fun. I used to love math. I miss math. Anyway, all right. So next question. Have any of you ever explained something into a mirror? I admit, I think it is a very good technique. A lot of speakers, if you're a speaker, I know we've got some speakers, good thinkers here, but if you have ever had to explain something or have ever tried to explain something into a mirror, you have a little hint at how the Feynman technique might work. Is there a topic? So have you explained something into a mirror, or is it just me? Like, am I just the embarrassing one who has tried to explain something into a mirror? I have even tried to explain something to these rubber chickens. But, you know, I'm strange that way. Have you tried to explain something into a mirror? Yes or no? Oh, Jennifer says math. So math must be something where I don't know what the disconnect is with math, because a lot of people, whether it's math or calculus, a lot of people say, yeah, I could take the test then, but I just don't even want to think about it now. Anyway, a lot of fear of math. All right. Is there a topic? And you should definitely come up with something. Really put it in the chat. Think of a topic that you would love to know with such clarity, and clarity being one of the main points of critical thinking, of the critical thinking mindset, is to be able to describe something with such clarity that you could describe it to a 12-year-old. Any topic. Think of a topic that you would want. If you could, it's something you don't know, you couldn't do now. Maybe something you think you know, but you don't really know. It could be like birds or whatever topic. Think of a topic that you would love to know more about, that you would have to know so much that you could teach it to a 12-year-old. All right. Aha, Einstein would approve. Exactly, because Einstein and Feynman both agreed on, and there was some overlap with those guys, both physicists, taking things apart, taking your knowledge apart. And that's actually a big part of the Feynman technique, which you will see. And we've got, Barry says, no. We'll see. Physics. All right, me too. Physics is interesting. And then you probably even have to get to a finer level of granularity. Probability. Probability is something, Fiona says probability, which to me is so important, because probability is something that drives so much of our decision-making, and yet it's very confusing. I think most of us have a fairly limited understanding of probability. And so when we have to make decisions based on probability, we might be falling back on erroneous understanding. Jennifer says international politics. Okay, these are fantastic topics. Keep them coming, because really think, the point is, you want to be thinking about this, because this is the first step in the Feynman technique. Let me brag on Richard Feynman a little bit, because Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist. He won the Nobel Prize for quantum electrodynamics. So he was also known as the great explainer. He was, we call him a super explainer. And there are people like that, where they can explain something with such clarity that you know that there are very few gaps in their knowledge. And I'm going to confess something, something political, a way that I see the world, and how I kind of ignored some gaps in my own knowledge. And this is on the issue in the United States. We've got people from all over. If you're here from somewhere else, let us know. We've got people from all over, international audience of good thinkers, participants of good thinkers. But this is something, where is my cursor? I'm looking for my cursor on my computer. There we go, so I can bring in your comments. Sorry about that. This is something, I have a strong opinion about gun control. My strong opinion was probably, and maybe still is, stronger than my knowledge and understanding of guns. Huge. So I have this strong opinion about gun control. And I thought to myself, I know how to name various guns, kind of, but do I really know how guns work? And if I don't know how guns work, is my strong opinion about gun control resting on a shaky foundation? I know that's a politically very dangerous thing to say, but it's really exploring the gaps in my knowledge. So that's an example of something that I use this technique, probably can continue to use it if I really wanted to commit, but it's actually something in my knowledge book. And this goes to the first step of the Feynman technique. Are you ready? The first step of the Feynman technique is to identify a topic, a concept that you want to know more about. And it's very, very specific. Now, before you think about that too quickly, there is a difference, and Feynman talks about this difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. So let's say his father was a big bird watcher, and I loved Richard Feynman's book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. I really recommend that book. But he describes his father explaining to him that, if you can just name a robin or a sparrow or whatever, and you can identify all of those when you're walking in the woods, that's great. But you don't know about birds. You know the name of things. And that is a huge difference, because a lot of my knowledge, I'll speak for myself, is knowing to identify things. But if that's as deep as your knowledge goes, you really don't know enough to apply that knowledge from one context to the next. So I'm going to tell you that Richard Feynman's he's very quotable, but one of his best quotes is, the first principle is that you should not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool. It's so easy to see other people making these mistakes, but it's not very pleasant when we have to look at our own mistakes in the mirror. All right. So the difference between knowing and naming. So this is his little quote. I'm going to read you this quote. So he says, "See that bird? That's a brown-throated rush. But in Germany, it's called a Halsenvogel. In Chinese, it's called a chungling. And even if you know all the names for it in every single language, you still know nothing about the bird. You only know something about people, what they call the bird. Now the thrush sings and teaches its young to fly, and flies so many miles away during the summer across the country, and nobody knows how it finds its way." So now you start to see the difference between knowledge about, Fiona, knowledge about versus knowledge of. Yes. And that can get deep into launching us into the Feynman technique. So thank you for that segue. Dane says, let's see. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Easier said than done. It's pretty easy to fool yourself, but you're right. It's easier said than done to avoid that for sure. Anyway, that's a great point. All right, let's get into it. So we've said that you first want to identify the concept you want to understand. And here it's important to be very specific. So if you want, in my example, if I wanted to know and understand more about gun control, I really could look at the politics, I could look at the behavior, I could look at the history, I could look at data. I could find the data that I want that supports my opinion. Excuse me. But maybe I would say, okay, the concept I really want to understand is guns. Very controversial. So I have to go back in history. I have to understand how it works. But maybe there's something simpler. Maybe like how a rubber band works. I want to know how a rubber band works. Why does a rubber band get hot? What happens to the molecules? Why does a rubber band get hot when I do this? Or why does this rubber band, I'm doing very clunky today. Or why is this rubber band different than this rubber band? So identify what you want to know. All right. I'll keep losing my cursor. All right. Then you take out a piece of paper and you write the subject down. Now, this is where your knowledge notebook comes in. Could be kind of cool to look back on your year and say, wow, here is something I didn't know in 2020 that by the end of 2021, I really knew. Then second step. So first step is easy, but not so easy, because if you're going to have an opinion on like a policy, there are a lot of gaps in your knowledge. So you have to pick what you want to know. All right. The second one is to pretend to teach it to a child. And some people say an elementary school student or a toddler. Some toddlers may have a limited language, but the idea is to think about teaching it to a child or a rubber chicken that has a limited vocabulary. So you're not using jargon. You're not using words that you don't know the meaning of, like as a substitute. You're not using other people's language. You're not defaulting to relying on a quote that you don't really understand. So that's step number 2. And a little bit more delving into this. So the way you do this is this. You write out everything you know about the subject. Now, you might know some things, and some of those things might be wrong. That's okay, because this is a process and it's yours. No one can take it from you. So you write out everything you know about the subject, and then you try to explain it to a rubber chicken, or think about a child, or explaining it into the mirror. And the key is you want to speak as well as write. So Socrates, who was not a fan of the written word because he thought that was a cop-out, he thought you should be able to engage in verbal dialogue because writing is not as challenging, because you can't go back and forth. And so you don't have to understand things with the clarity and depth that you do when you're dialoguing. In a way, Feynman was similar, because he said, well, you should write it and speak it. All right. So Jennifer says she's going to get, where is my cursor today? It's really driving me crazy. Jennifer says she is going to get a knowledge notebook. I love it, because when you have it and you look back, you go, oh, I see progress in what I'm doing. All right. So software engineers do this step number 2 they'll debug their code by explaining it line by line. Like, maybe they'll even take out the rubber chicken and explain it to a rubber chicken. And it turns out that one of the ways that we mask our lack of understanding is by using complicated vocabulary. And this is a really interesting thing, as I'm doing a lot of my training is to international audiences. And I really have to think twice, because for some of the audience, English is a second language. Sometimes it's a third or fourth language. So even some words like the word familiarity is something that I use a lot in the applied curiosity and critical thinking workshops. And I have to think back, okay, that's a word that needs to be simplified. Once you get it, you get it. But there's so many words in my workshops that I can't assume someone who is not a native English speaker understands. Probably I make that mistake on this show too. All right. Thank you, Barry. Barry says, great talk. Gotta go. Love what you're doing. Well, thank you for being here. I'm sorry you couldn't stay for the whole Feynman technique, but you're probably a big fan of Feynman anyway. Okay. So if you can't define the terms they need, then the next step, you need to go back. The next step will help you get there. So the third step, so first you define the concept, then you write down everything you know, as if you're teaching it to a child. And then you go in and identify the gaps in your knowledge. Now, we talk about knowledge gaps in applied curiosity, and we talk about 3 knowledge gaps. And, we talked about the circle of competence in a previous Good Thinking show. And how do you know the boundaries of your circle of competence? Well, here's the deal. If you can't explain it to a 12-year-old in a way that they can totally get it, not just naming the things, but totally get it, you've got gaps in your knowledge. And then you go back and you identify where those gaps are, where you forget the important things. You're not able to explain it. You're using maybe a fancier word. Twitter's good for that. You get down to, back when they had 140 characters, it was better, because you had to be short. You had to think about what you were trying to say in very short 140 characters. So that is helpful too, is to just get it brevity, less, and identify all the things. And then you can start to see how the different concepts interact. And now you're getting into knowledge. Where do you go for source material? Okay, so here's my question. Cynic, I can't bring these. Okay, Fiona says, Cynic, are you talking about Simon Sinek? Is that who you're talking about? Fiona has always great good thinker, a great thinker. Anyway, where do you go for your source material? Like, do you pick up a newspaper, online newspaper every morning and you go there for your source material? Or do you go to Google Scholar and start looking at original source material? What's your number one go-to when you really want to understand something? Where do you go? Where's the first place you go for source material? A lot of times I get lazy. I mean, it's not lazy, I suppose, but it's just I go to New York Times, I go to Al Jazeera, I go to The Economist, I go to Washington Post, but that's not original source material. So the key is to think about when you're going to fill in the knowledge gaps is to really have a couple of key places written down in your knowledge notebook where you can go for original source material. So if you read something about the vaccination and you read it in the New York Times, that's not original source material. That might be your source material, but you want to get closer and closer and closer to the source. And then maybe you Google. So Jennifer says Google. So there's a big difference between Google, which most of us do. It's a good place to start, right? And Google Scholar. And also maybe the third page of Google or the 10th page of Google may give you something more interesting than the first page of Google. All right. So Fiona says divergent sources. Perfect. This is a good hint because you want to also go to places that disconfirm your pre-existing beliefs. Jancy, welcome, Jancy. Jancy says experts. So for COVID, I look to virologists. Exactly. Yeah. And you can even go, and that's a great one because you're going to the original source material. Now, a virologist working on basic science might have a less of an agenda than maybe a virologist working on applied science, for example. And Fiona says, peer-reviewed Google Scholar. Yeah, Google Scholar is a great source. Peer-reviewed is good. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you can now buy peer review, but it's a good start. And Google Scholar, I love Google Scholar. It's a go-to. And part of it is sometimes you only get the abstract, so you have to pay for the articles, which is frustrating. But yeah, Google Scholar is a great source. And then the key is you go back. So once you've done this and you filled in the gaps, you try to explain it again to a 12-year-old. And you're imagining this. And so you're imagining if you had to make this rubber chicken understand guns or understand peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like, what could you describe a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Like the whole concept of it and how deep, like, do you know about pectin and gelatin that makes the jelly? And how does that work chemically? You start to realize that a lot of the things we know, we don't really know at the level that we think we know. All right. The next step. So once you have seen that you have gaps in your knowledge, then you go back and you try kind of step 2 again. But if you want to, and then when you get this whole process going, then you go to step 4, which is to organize and simplify. So now you have all these handcrafted notes that contain these simple explanations, and you organize them. You organize them into a narrative that you can tell from beginning to end, and you read it out loud. And if the explanation sounds confusing at any point, then you have to go back to step 2. So you've got identify the concept, pretend to teach it to a rubber chicken or a 12-year-old. Some people say a toddler. That might be a little bit much, but a young kid, who, so that they can understand. But maybe they'll say, I don't get it. And you start to see that they're using words or names for things instead of knowing. All right. Then you go and you check your knowledge gaps. You fill in those gaps and then you organize and simplify. And that's really, really it. Okay. So what is the subject? Put it in the chat that you would be willing to create a knowledge binder to commit to learning by using this Feynman technique. Is there a topic? Any topic. It could be rubber bands. By the way, I highly recommend Richard Feynman's YouTube video. You can find it on YouTube, and how he explains how a rubber band works. It's amazing. It just gives you an idea of how someone that's a super simplifier can really, really show you how to think about your learning or think about how you learn. So Fiona says mind maps. Ooh, that would be a good one. How mind maps work. And Jennifer says, I can tell when someone is knowledgeable when they can explain things in simpler terms so I can understand. Yeah. Now, I will say this has been a huge lesson for me because I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. And I will say that having to teach online courses, I mean, I've spoken and done workshops for years, but having to create online courses where the audience is broad. The audience, I mean, these are from all over the world, has really made me question how much I know about the topics that I've been teaching about for years, which, applied curiosity and critical thinking, and as it relates to decision making. And I'm constantly finding gaps in my knowledge, which is, it's just torture. But I'm to the point now where I kind of like it. Like when someone points out something or asks something, I realize something. My first response is, don't you just get it? And then I realize it's on me. It's on me. Thanks, Mo. I so appreciate that. We're here almost every Monday on Good Thinking, right here on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live, streaming both, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the US, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And okay, so like Donella Meadows and the Slinky to explain systems thinking. Yeah, and I don't think I've seen, I'm going to have to look that up. I'm a big fan of systems thinking. My expertise, like I wouldn't be able to probably, I have a good friend who is a major systems thinking expert, and I'm constantly in awe of all of the things she thinks about. And I thought, before kind of understanding all there is to know about systems thinking, I thought, I'm pretty good at that. I'm kind of an expert at that. No. Excuse me. I'm getting hoarse. Anyway, all right. Adding to my calendar. Fantastic. I really recommend that you pick a topic and you try this Feynman technique. I'm going to give you a last step as we're winding down the half an hour. Okay. Thinking in systems. Her book is amazing. All right. I think you're the second person who's recommended that. So I will definitely, choking to death, I will definitely check that out. 100% I'm going to put in my thing. Thank you. All right. So here's the fifth step. And this is a step that is not really part of the Feynman technique, but I don't know I kind of don't know why it isn't. That is to teach it. Actually, don't just pretend you're teaching it, but actually teach it. The ultimate test of your knowledge is to run it by someone, ideally someone who knows little of the subject, and read it out directly. Like if you don't want to even memorize it, that's okay. Take out your knowledge notebook, read it exactly and directly from your knowledge notebook. Present the material like a lecture. Then ask your friends for a few minutes. Just ask them, say, hey, I'm working on this project where I'm trying to pick a couple of topics each year to become really knowledgeable about. Would you be willing to be my guinea pig? Would you be willing to be the person to whom I teach this topic? And if they will, then you're golden. And then you take out your notebook and you read your things and you see if they're confused. And when they go like this, and you have to also say, you also kind of have to prime them. You have to say, I'm going to trust that you're not just going to be like, oh, that's great, Becky, or that's great, Fiona, or that's great, Jennifer, or that's great, Mo. But like, you're going to really make sure that I'm explaining this and you're asking every question that comes to mind. And when they don't get it, guess whose fault it is? Yours. All right. Then you volunteer. Next step. If you want to get to the next step, you volunteer to be a guest speaker in your child's classroom or your parents' retirement place. I've done this once. Someday I will tell you the most embarrassing thing ever when I looked out at the retirement home and everyone was asleep. That was a real, if you ever want to get good at speaking, speak to a retirement center. Now there's different ones, like if you go into the hardcore care versus I digress, but it's a really good technique. It's a great way to hone your skills in speaking and making sure that you're really knowledgeable about the topic that you're speaking on. All right, so that's it. That's the Feynman technique. It's really 4 simple steps, but they are profound. And also he was very clear that you don't use this for everything. Like, you cannot know at this level about everything. You don't need to do a scientific explanation about everything. But if you have a strongly held opinion that is informed by something that you haven't gone through this technique, chances are your opinion is resting on shaky ground. And that's the thing. So you would either have to hold that opinion a little less tightly or decide to fill your knowledge notebook so that you can form your opinion based on knowledge, true knowledge. And that may mean that you have to change your opinion. It's happened to me a couple of times. It's painful. Anyway, okay. So it's Jennifer says it's her best way to learn is to teach it. It is true. Fiona says, well done. Hope cough is okay. Love your new hairdo. Thank you, Fiona. I think it's just because I didn't have a cup of water here and I finished my coffee early, but it's dry. It's very dry. Anyway, well, thank you so much for being here. I hope you join each Monday. We've got some really interesting interviews coming up. So sometimes it's just a topic that we're discussing, and sometimes it's an interview, and we're all part of it. I think that this is a collective versus like a speech. It's kind of a live group of good thinkers. So thank you for being a good thinker, and have a great week. I'd love if you want to put later, if you're watching this, by the way, later, you want to put what you've decided to put in your knowledge notebook, or if you've decided to get a knowledge notebook, let me know, because that's so cool. Have a great week.